Welcome back to another HOA video. In today's story, an outrageous HOA establishes itself in my neighborhood. I am a farmer and they demand I must sell my farm property to them, but I refuse. Their fraudulent homeowner association police comes to my land and beats me up to intimidate me into giving them my property. Here is what happened. So this is one of the weirdest things that has happened in my life and that I feel really says something considering that I have had a pretty long life so far. I've lived in the Philippines my entire life and my family has never had much money. The one thing we were lucky enough to have was a small farm where we raised chickens. When I got old enough, I decided to join the military because I thought it would help my family more. That experience did not last too long due to me getting hurt and then having a bad infection that caused me to not be able to serve anymore. My arm had to have a chunk of muscle removed and does not work 100% anymore. Anyway, at the point in the story, I have taken over my family farm and live on it all by myself. Despite my limited use of one arm, I am still able to raise some chickens for my income between eggs and butchering. An HOA started forming as more small farms were being sold and bought up by people wanting to tear them down and build homes there instead. I was never even offered to be part of the HOA because they told me that farmers were too dirty to be involved and I should just give them my land and leave right away. I had nowhere to go and no reason to leave, so I told them that I was staying. They hated this and continued to try and tell me that I had to sell them the land because they needed my plot for official HOA business. I told them that I did not care and I was not gonna leave my property. They then proceeded to try various tactics in order to get me out of my home, but none of them were successful. They threw bricks through my windows, dumped trash by my front door and even drove through my fence. They wanted me out badly, but it was my farm and the only thing I had left in the world and I was not gonna just give it up. The HOA had formed an illegal fake police force to go around and do their bidding and dirty deeds. These were the people who did all of those bad things to try and kick me out of my home. If you wonder why I did not call the actual police, it is because here police corruption is fairly high and the HOA had money to pay off the police to look the other way and let them do what they wanted. It really sucks, but I knew calling them was not gonna do anything, so I could just watch and try to hope that they would move on to do something else. However, it turns out they were not gonna just forget about me and instead they took things to a much more extreme level. This HOA police came to my door one day holding baseball bats and knives in their hands. They told me that I had one chance to sign the deed over to the HOA or they were gonna punish me. I did not sign anything and thought they were acting all tough when in fact they actually started fighting. They punched and kicked me to the ground right in my front door entryway. I felt like they were gonna kill me and had not even started to attack me with a knife yet. However, what they didn't know was that I kept something near the front door just in case I ever had an emergency. So I was just able to grab it with my bad arm and they didn't even have time to process that I was pointing a gun right at them. I did not need two totally functional arms to shoot my weapon after all the training I went through. So I shot my gun and a bullet went right into the shoulder of one of the guys. The rest of the fake homeowner association police ran away and I was left hurt on the ground, unable to get up. I was lucky that a nice neighbor passing by called the real police and told them that I had to go to the hospital. It turns out they had broken two of my ribs and my entire body was covered in bruises. Now that I was sent to the hospital in that kind of condition, the police could not really ignore anything that had happened. The HOA had their own story though, and tried to get the police they were paying off on their side. They told the cops that I had went crazy and pulled out a shotgun to try and start killing people. Their fake police were just a bunch of good citizens supposedly that happened to see this and got the gun away from me and me to the ground before I could hurt anybody innocent. Now alone, I might have been in a ton of trouble as they had more money to bribe police or even a judge in this kind of situation. What they did not know was that I had proof and it could not get swept under the rug. I had a few issues with chickens escaping or wild dogs coming onto the property and then killing them. Despite not having a ton of money, I managed to get a small camera on the property so I could monitor the chickens to try and make sure everything was okay. This camera managed to catch the entire fight and proved that those men were the ones that came after me and started the fight. The HOA was gonna be investigated, and while that might seem like the end of the story, it only gets crazier from here. So one thing I'd been wondering the entire time was why they wanted my land so desperately for the HOA to have. They did not want to build new houses, so it really comes to wonder what they could do with a small farmland. Every member of the HOA was getting deeply looked into, and what was found out was extremely disturbing. These men had been arrested in the past for human trafficking before they came and set up the HOA where I live. When looking into the properties in their names, they found out that they were keeping young girls. There's no way to really prove what people plan to do in the future unless they tell you themselves or somebody assumes it. Based on what they were covering up, it can be assumed they wanted my farmland as a place to keep the girls they were trafficking close by. I was horrified when I found out what these evil men were doing, and so glad that they were caught. I did not care anymore about what they did to me, and honestly, if a few broken ribs caused girls to be safe, then I would be willing to get beaten again. But still, they were gonna get in trouble for hurting me, but it was not the bigger deal to anybody by far. So I was able to heal, and without the HOA in the neighborhood, things calmed down for me significantly. I still have no plans to sell my property, and can only think in horror that if I gave into what they wanted and sold my house to them, what would have happened. A bad experience that ultimately had a happy ending. And yeah, dear Ripe Stars, if you still enjoy the HOA stories, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell, and maybe even like the video, because that would help me tremendously. The next one is titled Petty Revenge. So, a while back, my uncle's neighbor died. He was a very nice old man and gave my uncle a lot of land for a cheap price because my uncle sold him some land right by his house to avoid him being landlocked. This, by the way, was years ago, and due to my uncle selling part of his land and it being close to the house, this man's mobile trailer was pretty much close to my uncle's house. The old man's property was shaped like a thin triangle, and he had to have certain clearance on the sides and front of his property to put a mobile home. For all these years, there has been no problems between the two, and they even invited him over for Thanksgiving a couple of times when his family wouldn't be able to attend. After he died, his son moved into the trailer, and this is when it started to go downhill. My uncle has to wake up at 4:15 AM to be at work by 5 AM. Richard, the son, would play music until 12 to 1 AM, and my uncle went over there a couple of times to ask him to stop, which he basically replied with, "I move out of the city to BFE for a reason." This of course frustrated my uncle, which led to the police being called. The issue was resolved for a while, and when it started back up was only a couple of times a week. It was still an annoyance though. Then, about 3 weeks ago, my uncle goes to his mailbox and saw that he received some mail for Richard. He starts to walk to his front door only to see Richard bust open the door and jump the stairs and rush to his car. As he was running, he said, "Late for a job interview, I will be back in a minute." My uncle returned home and started doing whatever he had planned around the house. A couple hours later, Richard returns and my uncle goes and gives him the mail. "Sorry for rushing out, I was late for a job interview which I didn't end up getting it anyways." My uncle asked what it was for and Richard said forklift operator. My uncle realized that he had a golden opportunity. He told Richard that the place he worked was in fact hiring for Lyft drivers and to apply. Richard ended up applying and getting the job and telling him he started the following Monday. My uncle knew that if he were to get hired, he would be the morning shift, which starts at 4:30, resulting in him having to wake up around 3:45 at the latest. Sunday night before his first day, my uncle let all the dogs out that night and let them bark all night. He set off his car alarm on accident around 12 AM and he borrowed a big speaker from my other uncle and turned it up and watched Saving Private Ryan. Needless to say, the next day when my uncle happened to run into him, he looked like a zombie. My uncle went up to him and said, "Hey, what's up?" Richard responded with, "Just learning my way around here. I don't know how you get up this early every day." My uncle proceeded to say, "Well, it's hard to get a good night's sleep with a lot of noise in the middle of the night." There was not a "oh crap" moment on Richard's face. He held his zombie face and said, "Yeah, true." However, since then there has been no loud noise coming from his house after 8 PM. Even on nights we know he does not have work the next day. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I would say sometimes that's the only way people can learn from their mistakes. The next one is a malicious compliance story. So just to clarify, this was the IT director at a government agency, basically meaning manager, and it's not about the director of the movie. Either way, this happened around 2010. I work in IT for a state agency. Since it is government, our leadership positions are mostly appointed by the governor rather than being promoted from within. As a result, we had a director of IT who knew nothing about IT. So we will call this director Karen. Karen came from a completely different unit, and due to a union dispute over a hostile work environment, she was reassigned to our unit rather than fired. Well, anyway, this frequently happens with appointees. They don't like to fire them because it makes the governor look bad. Unsurprisingly, the unit began going downhill after she took over because she was extremely emotional and tried to micromanage everything. My normal job duties involve computer repair and networking, covering multiple offices. I volunteered to help the main capital office create our computer software image, naively thinking it would help me get promoted, but all in all, it was just tedious and was starting to cause me to fall behind in my normal duties. I'd been working on the image for about 6 months, updating it when needed. For those who are not IT savvy, an image is a snapshot of the computer hard drive fully loaded with all of the drivers and software already installed. To do this manually would take 4 to 5 hours on every computer, whereas using an image would take about 40 minutes. Also, we work very standard hours, M to F, 9 to 5. On Thursday at 4 PM, we get an urgent message from Karen, stating that we must all report to the main office on Friday morning at 9 AM and bring our USB drives. We were told that if we didn't bring back the flash drives, we would be sent back to go get them. She didn't say why. Obviously, I was not happy about how unprofessional it was to give such little notice about a meeting that requires a 2-hour drive one way and to reschedule my entire day of meetings for PC repairs. I then called some associates that worked in our main office to find out what was going on. Apparently, Karen had convinced herself that IT support might have bad stuff on the drives, completely on a whim mind you, they didn't have software to track it, and the plan was basically to collect all flash drives, wipe them, and then give them back without telling us. The sheer stupidity of this idea was off the charts considering we kept all of our important troubleshooting tools on there plus the image. Since I did the imaging, my flash drive had all of the source files for the image, all of our software, drivers, multiple versions of Windows, along with the complete documentation of how to set it all up. We had no backup policy, but I did keep a personal backup of the drive. Cue malicious compliance. I wasn't happy about how Karen didn't tell us what was being done or why. I deleted my personal backup and decided to just play dumb and come to the meeting and turned in the drive. Surely they would be smart enough to say something, anything, before doing this, but nope. Sure enough, they were wiped without our consent or knowledge and then given back to us. So a few weeks go by and they ask me about how things are going with the image. I simply tell them that it's been erased by Karen without my knowledge, so unfortunately, there was nothing I could do and I'm not about to recreate it all from scratch. Most of IT support lost their copies as well during that meeting, and all the networking team had was a backup from years ago before I took over. Honestly, at this point I was sick of volunteering my time for nothing in the main office and it was making my normal job much harder, so I was happy to wash my hands of that. Needless to say, Karen was pissed, but she couldn't do a damn thing about it since it is their job to create backups and manage them, not mine. They had to recreate the image and documentation completely from scratch, dozens of hours of work. Karen was eventually reassigned to another unit and things got better in IT after that. I'm kind of like a folk hero in that agency now. Everyone was very happy to have Karen gone. About 3 years ago, I was finally able to afford my dream home on a beach. It is in an area where a lot of people only vacation for the summer or the place is rented out for Airbnb and stuff. But I actually live there year-round, not just seasonally. I have a job that is remote, so it does not matter. Anyway, my story is about a woman who essentially tried to front to her friends, lying and saying that my house is actually hers. Oh, but it gets even better. Let me first start by saying that my house is truly one of the nicer ones on the strip. It is located right on the beach and I spent a lot of time and effort to keep it nice. My garden is well landscaped and I have a nice clean pool that I am proud of as well. And yes, I work very hard to keep my house looking nice, and it is not that strange to see people admiring it as they walk down the beach. By the way, clearly a very humble OP. Anyway, I should also mention that I don't like to drive. I have an anxiety disorder and getting behind a wheel is terrifying to me, so I simply ride my bike to places.
Where we live, there is always nice weather, and with the occasional bout of rain and stores and restaurants very close by, making bike riding completely normal. This means that I never have a car out front to say, hey, someone lives here. One day I had decided to go biking around town and meet up with friends for lunch. I stopped at the store on the way home for a few things and headed back home. When I arrived at my house, there were several cars lined up in front of it, and there was even one in the driveway. I found this very strange, but it was summertime and there is always an increase in tourism, so I simply assumed it was people visiting the beach. I did not use my driveway, so I let it slide. But as I walked around the corner, I could hear voices laughing and talking loudly, and then there was the sound of splashing coming from the back. My mind was racing, having no idea what I was about to walk into. I came around the side of the house, standing outside my tall iron gate. I had apparently forgotten to lock it yesterday after I swam and tended the yard, to then see a group of 5 adults sitting at my patio tables and 3 children in the pool splashing and playing. The adults appeared to be having a good old time, with coolers and beers and white claws sitting on the tables. There was even a man trying to start up my propane grill. I heard one woman asking if there were towels that the kids could use because she had forgotten hers. One woman with the most entitled air about her says, "Oh, of course, those would be in the house. I'll have to get those for you in a minute." I finally spoke up. "Excuse me? Who are you? And why are you on my property?" I admit, I've always hated confrontation, but this is one of those times where you cannot just ignore someone trying to encroach upon your home. The main woman, let's call her TB for the Karen, she took off her sunglasses and stared at me. "And who are you?" Her friends are looking at me like I have 3 heads, and one even asked if she needed to call the cops for TB. "I am the owner of this house." She laughed and said, "Do you guys hear this woman? People are always trying this crap. Sweetheart, you must be confused. Your Airbnb is probably next door." Her friends chuckled along with her, chiming in and telling me to leave them alone. I did not leave and only watched in horror as these entitled people used my home like it was theirs. No, this is my house. I have lived here for a few years now. "Honey, I know you're jealous, but I promise, I'm sure your rental is somewhere nearby." This woman was clearly not going to give up on this charade in front of her friends and family. I could hear some of them even congratulating her on being able to purchase such a nice house on the beach even after her terrible divorce. She then made a joke about how her ex-husband is the one who paid for it and got the whole group laughing again. And by the way, Ripe Stars, this definitely sounds like a cheap wine-fueled Karen party. Anyway, she saw me standing there still and got up, walking over to me. She closed my gate on me and said, "You need to leave now, or you're not going to like it." She leaned in and whispered one last thing, "I will leave $100 on the table when we are finished." As she walked away, she said loudly for her friends to hear, "Okay girl, you're weirding out my friends. Please leave us alone." That is when I started thinking, you know what? I'm not going to tolerate this, but I would like to embarrass this woman. Without anyone noticing, I walked around the other side and casually locked the padlock to the gate. They are trapped now if they try to leave. You know what? I'm sorry. I think you're right. I must have the wrong house. I walked away as they talked crap about how dumb and crazy I was. They were about to see what happens when you side with a Karen like this woman. I called a towing company and had all of their vehicles removed from the front of my house. They could not see what was happening because they were at the back of the house and the cars were in the front. Thankfully, with their music and drinking, they did not notice the noise. That is when I made the final move to all the cops. When the police arrived, the drunk idiots had not even heard the sirens. 2 cop cars pull up into the now empty driveway and the front of my house. They asked me questions about the situation, and I simply told them that I came home from lunch and found these people in my yard refusing to leave. One of the cops said that he had seen this many times. People just assume that these beach homes are only occupied a few weeks out of the year and then think that they can just get away with squatting there or using the pool for their own agenda. TB must be one of those people. She probably thought that she would be able to lie to her friends about it being her home and then they would just go to the beach when they were finished. The officers approached the gate and you could hear one of their walkie-talkies going off before they rounded the corner to the back of the house. TB must have heard that or gotten a whiff that was something up, and the sound of scraping chairs on pavement could be heard as she started scrambling. "Get out of the pool!" she shouted at her kids. We finally could see them now. TB looked panicked and was grabbing as much of her stuff as she could. She was screaming at her friends to get their stuff, and it was pretty obvious that they were completely shocked and confused by her behavior. "Ma'am," one of the officers called out to her. "Ma'am, stop grabbing things and come with us." She ignored him and ran to the other side of the patio to the gate, clearly thinking that she was going to make a break for it. When she realized that the gate was locked from the outside, she started scrambling to climb over the 6-foot iron gate. Her friends, kids and police watched with mild amusement and confusion as she foolishly slid down the iron bars, cursing and panting as she failed miserably. One of the police officers laughed his butt off as she got halfway up by standing on a chair and very ungracefully fell backwards, stumbling several feet until she landed in the pool. She flopped and sputtered, screaming for her oldest kid and boyfriend to help her because she could not swim. And she was not even in the deep end of the pool. The officers eventually went in after I unlocked the gate, pulling a very soggy and angry TB from the edge of my pool and putting her in handcuffs. She was drunk and belligerent, saying that she could easily sue me for this, which I know is complete BS. Her friends apologized and thankfully the children were able to go with their aunt who was there. Just like we had suspected, she did not think that anyone would return home to bust them using someone else's pool. I did not end up pressing charges on TB, but I did ask that she formally apologize for her crappy Karen behavior.
And with this, we have reached the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching, and please don't forget to check out my playlists for more awesome videos. Also, if you haven't already, I would very much appreciate it if you could subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell to not miss any videos. Thank you so much. I will see you again tomorrow.